The 7 in 7 design is an excellent way to build increased trust and stronger relationships within a team. It is a fairly delicate design to execute because the focus is on sharing personal information, and it depends on the facilitator's deep belief in the process and their sincere modelling of it during the instruction phase. To make the participants feel safe, the facilitator has to lead from the heart and provide meaningful modelling. It is therefore a slightly different design from the others, requiring more attention to the readiness of the team and sincere support from both the facilitator and the leader. However, if you and the group have this willingness to dig deep and take a risk, the group will never be the same again. Let's take a closer look at what drives this design. Undertaking a deep dive into yourself is, for many of us, breaking all the rules. It's not something that everyone feels comfortable doing. Digging into how we're perceived, pulling off the covers of our family of origin to see what really makes us tick. But these parts of us determine the kind of baggage we carry around, which is often detrimental to our behaviour. And while we may be aware to some degree of our impact, it is rare that we have the opportunity to learn from others and their stories. One thing is true, however, we all have stories. We also have secrets that few ever know and that can keep us limited in our ability to communicate, lead, or be a positive member of a team. Let's imagine that most of us believe that we should be the best we possibly can be, live a productive life, and not hold ourselves back from our potential. To do that means we have to know as much about ourselves as possible. Such an exploration is bound to uncover areas of strength as well as deficiencies. Before moving towards a better self, you have to own your deficiencies. One way to do this is to share what you learn with a friend or even a team of people you really trust or would like to trust. When you can share your strengths and limitations, you take a major step towards owning your imperfect self, and it frees you to try on new ideas and behaviours. But to even get a glimpse of the possibilities open to you, you have to be vulnerable, and that is not in most of our plans for life. It is much easier to remain comfortable, to not invite risk by exposing our weaknesses, than to have the courage to open that door of conversation. One thing we have learned over the years of using this design is that if we are willing to engage in some shared risk with individuals we trust, we are then more willing to take even greater risks by looking at what holds us back. Therefore, feeling support and care from others is an avenue towards building even more honesty in our lives. Another thing we have learned is that one of the things most people want more than anything is to be accepted for who they are. We leverage this fact within the 7 in 7 design to help encourage people to share deeply with one another. The power behind this design comes from creating an opportunity for people to share their information with others who are also willing to be vulnerable, who will therefore not judge anybody and their limitations. What stops us from living this way is that we don't have the time required to build the trust necessary to share this openly. Most of us are lucky to have 1 or 2 people in our lives with whom we can be so open and vulnerable, and these people are not usually our teammates at work. This design helps create that trust safely and rapidly. Some people will inevitably pull us aside and say, "I didn't come here for therapy." Our response goes something like, "Well, life is all about therapy. Changing ourselves and helping others to be the best that we can be, whether at home or at work, is what enriches our personal stories and provides us with new and valuable choices. Same old will not provide the key to that lock." This design is meant for intact teams of 3 or more people who already have a basic level of trust among them, or at the very least, an open understanding of one another, and are seeking to take this to the next level. Please again note, this design will not be effective unless some trust exists already within the team and there is interest in going deep. The premise of the design is simple. Each member of the participating team is asked to go off by themselves and generate a list of the 7 most powerful events or relations that have shaped who they are as an individual today. These can be either positive or negative experiences. The idea is that unless the group knows these critical parts of who they are as individuals, they cannot truly know themselves and what makes them tick. Being willing to risk sharing these factors creates a bonding experience. Often the list includes stories about families and the consequence of parental or sibling relationships, a traumatic event that changed how someone acts or feels, or a teacher or mentor who changed them forever. What is essential is that they have left an indelible print on how the person thinks, acts, and what they deeply believe. These events are core to who we are and who we are still becoming. Most of us have more than 7 and will experience others as we continue to develop. Step 1, the setup. Preparing a group of individuals to share intimate, powerful facts about who they are demands the facilitator take a personal approach. They must communicate a deep belief in the value of the activity and be willing to model the process. If the facilitator is not willing to demonstrate a high level of risk and hence trust, then who are they to ask the same of the group? Thus, the facilitator must first explain what the design is about and why it is important. The goal here is to convey to the group that this activity increases trust toward one another and will help them become a more productive, cohesive team. Step 2, the modelling. The facilitator must model an example or two from their life so that the group really begins to know who they are as a person. The most important thing about this step is that they must set a high bar for the group. It's not necessary to share all 7 experiences during the introduction, unless the facilitator is a critical member of the team. If this is the case, the facilitator should introduce the activity with a personal example or 2, but then share the rest later. Sharing that they were born on a rainy night in Omaha is not a high bar. Here are a couple of examples to help the facilitator identify suitably deep experiences for the modelling. 1. They might have been abused as a child by an alcoholic father, left home at an early age to avoid further abuse, resulting in a mistrust of people in positions of authority. 2. Perhaps they had a mentor in college who turned their natural skepticism into optimism, motivating them to study and eventually resulting in scholarships for further study. 3. They might have had an experience in the military or in a failed relationship that reshaped how they acted in the future. The key here is to choose the deepest, most meaningful stories you can for the modelling. The deeper the facilitator is willing to dig, the more the group will be willing to follow them. Most likely, this is new behaviour for the facilitator as well. Their behaviour helps define the new boundaries for the group and provides unstated permission. Step 3, the digging. Ask the group to take about 20 minutes to write down their 7 positive or negative experiences that have profoundly shaped who they are today. These do not need to be scripted at all, just jotted down as reminders of what to talk about next. Sharing should feel like a conversation with friends and not at all contrived. Step 4, the sharing. Using what you know about the group, you need to select the first person who will share their story. Above all, this needs to be someone who will risk being totally authentic for the rest of the group. It is not a great idea usually to have the leader go first. Better to wait a round or 2 until they and the group are ready for them to share. As a facilitator, you must have a sense of how open the leader can be. Unless you know the leader well and this person has a good, open relationship with their group, This can lead to the sharing being at a rather awkward and shallow level. Asking for volunteers to go first, who can encourage people to dig deeply and be great role models for the group, is often a much safer way to kick this process off. However, because the sharing step will occur only after some time, the facilitator will see evidence that will determine their choice of candidate to go first. Once you have observed even a brand new group for a little while as a facilitator, you can generally pick out the individuals who are likely to be willing to share first and then encourage them to go for it. But whomever you choose, the first person must be willing to model the necessary openness. Here's a really top tip. Be sure to let whomever you choose to go first know what you will be asking of them in advance so they can ready themselves. Tell them the reason they are being chosen is that you know they will do a great job of sharing deeply and modelling for the rest of the group. Such support needs to be authentic. Before the first person shares their story, tell the group that they will be expected to generate 1 or 2 questions at the end of the story for the person doing the sharing. This participation helps to create a shared experience and provides support for the person sharing. This also reduces the possible awkwardness and sense of isolation that can follow such meaningful sharing. The questions can add more depth and show that the listeners care. And it's safe to assume that some people, as they hear the stories of their teammates, will add more risk and substance to their own stories when it's their turn. The facilitator will also choose the second person to share their story, again someone they believe will model openness. Try to take time to prepare the second person up front, the same way you did the first. Once the first 2 stories have been shared, a high level of candour will usually have been established, and going forward, you can request volunteers from the group. It is the facilitator's decision how many stories should be shared at one time, but it is unusual for 2 individuals to share in a row because the involvement and emotion generated can be exhausting. A good idea is to insert a different kind of activity to bolster energy in between each 7 and 7 sharing. These are best done one at a time, with a couple of hours in between each one, and over several different days. If you need to do 2 in a row, give the group a 10-minute break between each 7 in 7 sharing. The name for the design comes from our original intention of sharing 7 stories in 7 minutes. What we quickly discovered, though, was that the actual sharing takes more like 20 or 30 minutes per person, especially when you factor in questions from the group. When the sessions are taking this long, you know you have them at a deep enough level. Step 5, the so what. After several people have shared their stories, at some point take time to process the event. Ask these types of questions of the group. What have you experienced so far? What did you learn? What is the value of this design? You can use this feedback to determine whether the process should continue or how to space out the stories. The true readiness of the group you are working with can only be determined by how the participants respond to the task. Our experience is that most participants feel it is scary, but also exciting and enlightening. The discussion often generates confidence in some members who've been holding back, even though they may wish to jump in. Here is a summary of the steps, with the time needed for each. Step 1, the setup. Step 2, the modelling. Step 3, the digging. Step 4, the sharing. Step 5, the so what. The total design takes 90 minutes.